We are TFR.
My faith in destiny is all I need to prevail.
Truth Frequency Radio.
The grand deception as matrix is all-encompassing, consuming, and broad-reaching, yet so covert in imposition, it is largely unnoticed by those born into its nurturance. What if all we thought we knew of truth was sequestered upon lies, carefully manufactured science, and craftily complicated algorithms meant undecipherable? Comfortable in deceit and the convenience of routine, most reject truth when confronted by it, as people do not like being told that they have been bamboozled, especially by those systems they have invested trust within. Few will latch on to anything that challenges or contradicts foundational belief, choosing to cling to false illusion, so long as either it is majority opinion or someone they admire perpetuates lie. Fewer are willing to embrace change, having no real concern for truth, and as such will not put forth the least bit of effort to its discovery. Many disregard it as meaningless until it affects them directly, and even then, it is monumental task for them to change mindset and embrace new perspective. Most have tendency to lash out immediately against anything or anyone that challenges what they think they already know. Thus, the seeker of lost paradise may seem a fool to those whom have never sought the other worlds. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed. I thank you for taking the time to join us on this Saturday. For the next 2 hours, I am honored to have as guests with me Jonathan Christopulos, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. Better known as the Morgile on YouTube, who's also been covering and going down the rabbit hole and bringing forth perspective on the flat earth and all other things in connection to it. Jonathan, are you there, brother?
I'm here, man. Good to be here, and it's actually pronounced Christopulos, but that's okay. I'll forgive you.
All right, I appreciate it. I should have got clarity before we went live on broadcast. But hey, man, I appreciate you. Appreciate you taking the time to join us. And we've had the opportunity to do roundtable discussion with David Weiss and Michael Adams previously, and so that was a really amazing show. And we'll bring that out at some point. I haven't burned it or compiled it, but I know that the listening audience will benefit from that discourse. We covered a lot of things intriguing as far as this particular topic, but let me give you opportunity to let people know where they can go to find your work and also the other radio broadcasts that you're involved in, any current projects, any websites, anything of that nature that you wanted to bring forth.
Yeah, sure. I've got a lot of different things going on. First off, you can find my stuff mainly on YouTube. That's where I just pretty much upload all my videos. My channel is The Morgile, TheMorgile. I got over 100 videos on there. Most of them are flat Earth related or globe Earth skeptic related videos. And then I've got 2 shows that I do. Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern. Sundays at 3 p.m. Eastern. I'm on the Globebusters on YouTube live. We do a live broadcast, and then you can find all the archives on YouTube. And then on Sundays at 6 Eastern, I do This Week in Flat Earth with Lori Ferrari and Lawrence Wright. So there's a ton of stuff, tons of things that you can find. And right now I'm actually working on a video. I should have it out in the next couple days. And other than that, I've got all sorts of things planned for the future. I don't want to get the cart in front of the wagon on anything. So that's pretty much what I'm up to. You can find tons of my work all over the place on YouTube. So there you go.
Yeah, you're a very busy individual, and you are very productive with your time, and you're also very eloquent in your presentation, which was one of the reasons why I reached out to you. And also, I'm hoping also that the public will encourage you to do so. But I have offered Jonathan assistance should he ever decide to put together all of his very clever and ingenious rants in book form and to present them as in that kind of medium. And I think that people would be greatly benefiting as far as the work that you've done in that way as well. Because, as I said, you're very well spoken, eloquent in your discourse, and that a lot of the things that you've covered, and saving all of that information if you did have the time to do so. That I would most certainly be willing to help you in that regard. So hopefully
Yeah,
you'll
and
do that.
it's really more an issue of just aggregating everything and organizing it and putting it together in such a fashion so that it's formatted for print or ebook. So it's definitely something that'll probably happen sooner rather than later. Right now, the whole thing is still just sort of in the aggregate and organize phase. So there's a lot of material to cover on this topic. And in that poem that you opened with is a couple things that are just so true. Is the Matrix analogy. I mean, everybody's seen the Matrix, but when you think about it in such a context, it really makes a lot of sense, because we're basically limited in terms of what we think is possible. We're limited in terms of what we think is stupid. And so we're basically really just biased observers, and we believe most of what we're told without really checking anything, without scrutinizing the assumptions, without checking the facts, without checking for curvature, for example. And so in that regard, yeah, we're basically asleep, most people, and
Right.
they're having a version of reality suggested to them. And so, the whole Matrix thing is such a perfect analogy. It's almost hard to avoid it in this context, because there's, this huge paradigm shift that everybody's sort of been waiting for. And as far as I can tell, this is it. And there's so much prophecy in terms of biblical prophecy that leads up to this, and I'm sure we'll get into that and the book of Enoch as well. Um, and one of the things that you mentioned in that poem too is these indecipherable algorithms, this complex mathematics that's designed around the possibility or the theory that the world is a spinning globe. And to me, I don't know at what point all of these misunderstandings became lies, but by the time, NASA was launching rockets up to the moon, it was lies. But, 4 generations ago, I never even met my great grandfather. So I certainly didn't know his father, and I don't know what they believed. And it doesn't really matter. If you talk to anyone that understands propaganda, and they'll tell you it takes 3 generations to basically breed out any idea or to build any theoretical construct that you want in the minds of everyone. Takes 3 generations. And so, if you sort of understand that, it doesn't matter how long this has been going on. It's been going on as long as anyone alive can remember. Um, and it's basically a worldwide thing. Now, I've talked to people recently that suggest that, like, some countries, like people from Honduras, are taught in schools that the world isn't a spinning globe, but I don't know. I've also talked to people from China who said I was in a cult because I was questioning, the NASA, basically. Um, but there is definitely a lot of just totally incomprehensible mathematics that is built around this premise that the Earth could theoretically be a spinning globe, which I suppose it could in theory, but it actually isn't. And so you've got people like Newton, the famous father of basically theoretical physics. The father of physics wrote the Principia back in the late 1600s, early 1700s, something like that. Um, But even when he wrote that, he was writing it like, if all is all if hypothetical, and up to that point, to me, people didn't even really have the mathematical construct to get behind this whole spinning globe Earth thing. And so when you look further back into history, like at the Mercator projection, for example, which is the map that most people, basically we still use the Mercator projection as a map to represent the face of the Earth. That was before the Principia. So, it brings all these things into question. We're taught growing up that, people that used to think the Earth was a flat and not a globe, these are stupid people that didn't understand science. But who knows if it was 500 years ago? Maybe it was 200 years ago. I mean, we really don't know. And
Yeah, true.
you know what I mean?
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
well, I was just going to say also that this whole complex set of algorithms, undecipherable algorithms, has become science. It's become a belief system as opposed to a process to discern the truth. And so, people that say that they're scientific, they're actually not. They're just adhering to the belief system. They're conforming to the matrix that we were all sort of, reared in, right?
Right. Indoctrinated into, yeah. And it was Joseph Goebbels, propagandist for the Nazis, who said that if you repeat a lie often enough, it will become the truth. And in this case, it's absolutely been verified as such, because they just keep building the lies upon lies upon lies. And then it's been, as we said, indoctrinated into our minds, and the children raised into this belief system that none of us ever even really questioned it. And we totally thought that anybody that thought otherwise was completely lunatic fringe in accepting something other than the globe system. We're all seeing the images of all the children in the classrooms gathered around the globes, and the teachers pointing out certain countries. And this is from the time that, real young, elementary school, all the way up through high school and college, and nobody ever even considers it. Reminds me of Rob Skiba was talking about one of his friends that was listening to his show. He went and presented this mathematical problem to his friend, and talking about how the curvature, the supposed curvature, and the mathematical formula to figure it out and see, whether the 8 inches per mile squared inversely, how he could figure out a particular equation. And then he gave him this mathematical formula, and the person came up with the answer, and then he was applied it to real life situation, and he was like, we see this every day, because living off of the California coast, he was talking about the Alcamea Arch. This particular arch is like 20 some miles off of the shore. And according to this guy's calculations, you're not supposed to even be able to see it, but yet they witness it every day, and nobody even gives that any kind of consideration. And I know for myself, in trying to look into the curvature and why it is that we're able to see things like the Statue of Liberty, or even with Newicki's, where he did the Chicago skyline across Lake Michigan, and all these different cityscapes and lighthouses and things of that nature, which are visible at extremely long distances. There's people in Hawaii that talk about being able to see one of the other, I believe it's Kauai from Maui, which is like 90 plus miles. Another one of my friend was talking about in a show that we did recently about seeing Cuba, the lights of Cuba from Mexico, a certain portion. And, all of this should not be possible according to the whole premise that we're living on a planet that's spherical, and that according to the calculations for measuring the whole curvature, that these things should not be readily visible. And then people giving all of that as possibility up to light refraction, or that they these kind of things could happen on clear days or whatever. But this is stuff that is being repeated and witnessed every day. And when you really look into and investigate this topic, open yourself to the possibility of it, and you learn that, yeah, there is no measurable curvature. Even individuals, the engineers building bridges and canals and railroads over very long distances, they take into no account of the curvature of the earth, and so things like this really make you question why it was and how it was that we ever came to believe and to accept this lie without, just like with NASA, no, we give them the benefit of the doubt and believe that all the stuff that they put forth is truthful, when in really looking into it, you learn that they are nothing but a bunch of liars, and that how can we believe anything that they put forth? And so I'll give you a chance to comment on that. And then afterwards, I'd like to go into just your journey of awakening, even things that you woke up to, like possibly 9/11, government sponsored tyranny, that kind of thing. And then we'll bring it to this discussion.
Sure. Yeah, and curvature is a big part of this, because that's one of the first things that you really sort of have to look at, and I believe that's why they don't teach it. They don't not only do they not teach it to kindergartners or fifth graders or high schoolers or really anyone, they just don't teach it. They don't even teach it in college. You're not, even if you go to college to be an engineer, they teach you not to account for curvature. So, there's this huge thing that it's like, okay, geologists did a study, and I believe it was the state of Kansas, one of those Midwest states, is perfectly flat. It's as flat as a pancake, according to geologists. So, same thing goes for if you're standing out in the middle of the ocean. It's flat as a pancake, but it should be, every direction away from you should be downhill. And 1 mile dropping 8 inches, that's not really going to be noticeable. But you're right; it's an exponential effect when you get out to 2 miles, 3 miles, 10 miles, 20 miles. 8 inches per mile squared is describing a curve. That would be very, very noticeable. You mentioned the photo from Joshua Nowicki. Yeah, he took it was from over 50 miles away across Lake Michigan, clearly showing the skyline over the horizon when it should be a quarter mile below the horizon. So people will say, oh, it's refraction, light bends, and it does. But the problem is, like, if you're standing out in the ocean, the horizon is always right in front of you, no matter which way you look. It's always at eye level. If you go up in a weather balloon, hot air balloon, a couple miles up, it's still eye level. If you go 10 miles up or 20 miles up in a weather balloon, it's eye level. And it should drop away from you lower and lower as you gain in altitude. Not so much in the first couple miles, but definitely after 10 miles. And so, everything we can observe and everything that we can measure, even like you said, architects, engineers, it's basically law. They still, they might teach the curvature calculations in their schools as hypothetically, but if you're actually an architect, if you're actually an engineer that's responsible for railways, bridges, canals, anything like that, it's illegal for them. That it's written right into the legal language that they consider the baseline or the ground as a consistent level baseline, as a flat level surface, regardless of the distances involved. Which, if you've got a 2 mile long bridge or a 6 mile long bridge like the one in Florida, you'd have to account for curvature. There'd be, within over 6 miles from one point to the other, what 6 times 6 is 36 on 8, 24. So, just many feet in curvature over even just 6 miles. I should probably do the calculations so I don't sound silly, but I don't have my calculator up. But the point is, no matter how hard you try to find curvature, you can't. And that's a really big argument. Me personally, the even bigger argument that sort of pushed me over the edge is the lack of motion,
Right.
because motion is something that's pretty easy to detect and predict. Anywhere, if you get on a merry-go-round, anything that's spinning, if you're attached to that body spinning, you'll stay spinning with the body. But if you throw something away or up in the air from a rotational frame of reference, that object never stays fixed to the rotational frame of reference. And so when you see things like, even when I was 10 or 11 years old, I took a flight from Florida to Texas, and I was confounded because the two flights were identical going to Texas and back. The flight times were the same. So I was like, totally like freaked out because I couldn't make sense of it even then. But of course, I just sort of folded that back into the matrix, if you will, and that's sort of what we do. So, like you said, even though this has been right in front of us our whole lives, we just don't see it. There's sort of like a cognitive dissonance, or even maybe a mass hypnosis. I don't know which, maybe a little bit of both. But if you don't see something that's right in front of your face, or if you believe that there's all this wild motion when there isn't, that there's something wrong there.
Yeah, I totally never second guess that either. And then after I started to investigate this particular topic, then I discovered that the real science actually verifies that the Earth is motionless and it's fixed and stationary, which is also confirmation to several passages within the scriptures which declare and make such assertion. And so, they, when you really begin to investigate this topic and open yourself to this possibility, then you find out, yeah, the science absolutely verifies, corroborates that the Earth isn't moving. And if it's not moving and we're not spinning once daily on an axis, and certainly not annually orbiting around the sun, then that nullifies, completely destroys the whole heliocentric solar system worldview, and everything else that is perpetuated and based upon it. And so the geocentricity and all of that, and the fact that we're not moving, that completely forces one to acknowledge that there's certainly something wrong with what we've been taught and what we've accepted as far as the whole, the scientism as the religion that we've been taught and indoctrinated into through the educational systems. And so, yeah, that was a big one for me. Those two things completely destroyed any credibility and any belief that I still yet remained holding on to as far as the heliocentric globe model. And so ever since that, I've been trying to um, really come to truth on, well, what is, as far as geocentrism and the model of the world, enclosed, the firmament, the dome, all of that. I'm still, trying to reassess and reevaluate everything, knowing that I have to rethink it all.
Yeah, we really do. And, one thing that I sort of fall back to is the distance to the sun. If the Earth was a ball with the given, uh, distances, 25,000 miles around, spinning once for 24 hours, so over 1,000 miles at the equator. But if that was the case, then, based on the calculations going way back to ancient Greece, then the sun would have to be about 93 million miles away. It just has to, because of the calculations. If you measure the angles of the shadows cast by the sun at high noon on the same 2 points on the same meridian, but with, say, 400 miles in between those 2 points, using spherical trigonometry, the sun is 93 million miles away. Using plane trigonometry, the sun's only, maybe 4,000 miles away. But so the mathematics, works in either model, but we've been force fed this model as if there was no debate. And especially, in our lifetimes, growing up with the Apollo moon missions as ancient history, basically for me, who are you to question that? Who are we to say, no, you guys can't be right. These two flights couldn't possibly be identical in duration. Therefore, the Earth isn't a spinning globe. It really does prove it very nicely, but it's just impossible for us to go against, what all of the apparently wise elders have arrived at over the course of history. Who are we to question that? But at the end of the day, we have to question everything, especially if we're talking to Christians here, because we're warned very clearly of a strong delusion, a great deception
Right.
that that will basically, confuse even the very elect, if that's possible. And so, people are on the lookout for, a fake alien invasion or a real alien invasion, whatever. But that's only possible in the heliocentric, infinite universe model. If there's anybody coming here, they're not coming from other planets.
Right.
Maybe it's just our government screwing with us. Maybe there's other entities that we're not aware of that are living underground or under the ocean. That's what a lot of people think. And maybe, it's something else. Maybe they're coming from somewhere else on this plane that's beyond our little solar system. Before, we sort of always thought that we're just a little small, tiny part of nothing, basically a little part of a solar system that's just a little part of a galaxy that's just, a little galaxy off floating around in space. But this whole thing changes when you realize, well, no, the solar system is just a feature of the world. If you observe high altitude weather balloon footage, the space above you doesn't actually display any stars. So,
hold on to that thought, brother.
Yeah.
We'll be right back, everybody. All right, everyone, welcome back. I do want to comment on something that you were, and then I'll give you a chance to finish up on before what you were talking about before we went to break. You had mentioned the strong delusion, and in the scriptures it tells us to prove all things, and to not just write anything off, but it's the glory of God to hide a matter and the glory of kings to seek it out. And for many people, they just automatically like, this is totally crazy. I'm not going to look into it. This is lunacy. And, admittedly, when my listeners first sent me information, sent me videos about this particular topic, I was hesitant to look into it. This is something that I had thought was settled, however long ago I thought it was already settled, and that some of the world's greatest minds had worked on this and resolved it as issue. And so, but being open-minded and not being one to automatically write off something unless I at least give a certain amount of time to investigating it, I opened myself to the possibility, and I decided I was going to spend a day just trying to debunk the information. And when I did so, that's when really the rabbit hole opened itself and presented itself before me in such manner that I knew that even after a few afternoons of investigation, that there was more to this than I would be able to write off, even in a week's time. And and then after accepting it, embracing it, and then applying what I had learned to that portion of the book of Enoch, which I was never able to make sense of previously, and then having all of that unlock and unfold for me, that's when I knew I had to write the book that that I just finished this past September, and ever since then, I've just the journey is still ongoing. I'm still having to reevaluate, reassess so much of what I thought I knew. And if this isn't the mother of all conspiracies and the strong delusion that we've been warned about, or at least a major part of it, because I do believe that the whole Darwinian evolution, and also the next stage of it is that the ancient aliens are our creators. It's my opinion that all of these things are also hingent upon this Darwinian heliocentric worldview and the lies that have been perpetuated as this grand matrix, and that it will be grown. They will grow upon what they've already got everybody to buy into. Morgile?
Yeah, definitely. And just to sort of wrap up what I was saying before, and this is something that I've really sort of been thinking on hard here lately because it's just another one of those things where I'm just left completely confounded. If you look at weather balloon footage, it's always during the day, of course, but once they get up to a certain altitude, they're above the thick atmosphere, and you can see blue below them and black sky above them. But there's never any stars. You can't ever see any stars from weather balloon footage during the day. So I always thought that this was due to, the light from the sun causing, like, I guess you could say, interference patterns or whatever in the visible light spectrum, and also the reflective nature of our atmosphere in sunlight. But when you think about it, you can't see the stars during the day, but you can see the moon during the day. So that moonlight is penetrating our atmosphere, but the starlight isn't, and we can't see the stars even from a weather balloon above the atmosphere where it's not reflective during the day. So it's just really sort of a mystery. Is it just something simple like interference waves of the sunlight, or does it have to be nighttime to see the stars, right? Even if you're above the atmosphere. So that's just sort of what I was saying there. In terms of like Darwinism, evolution, yeah, this whole globe Earth is really it's the construct, it's the matrix upon which all of these other deceptions are even really possible. Not to mention, even Charles Darwin himself said if we don't find some intermediary species, which is like, a dog giving birth to something other than a dog, or an ancient reptilian giving birth to some other sort of species, there you'd have to, just by default, just by the sheer law of averages, Darwin said, if we don't find these intermediary cross species between one animal and another, then this whole evolution Darwinism doesn't work. It's a failed theory. And so here it is, I don't even know how many decades later, but we've still never found any sort of evidence for evolution, and it's still taught in all schools. And so, yeah, but that's not even the start of it. If Darwin knew the truth, and he knew that life wasn't some cosmic accident caused by soup somehow turning into living organisms, single-celled organisms, then he never would have even thunk to make these extrapolations that he did out there in the Galapagos Islands. But the context of Enoch is something that I'm really interested in. And, just for people out there that don't know, and then really for me, I'm just going to ask probably a couple stupid questions to you. But now the book of Enoch, wasn't that sort of discovered in recent modern history?
Rediscovered. Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I forget the guy's name, but he was traveling through Ethiopia and discovered that it was part of the Ethiopic canon, along with Jubilees and Jasher and a few other. The King James or the canon in Ethiopia is more extensive, and the Book of Enoch was part of that particular text. And then after the discovery of this Essene Book of Enoch, they also discovered a Slavonic, what's called Second Enoch, or the Book of the Secrets of Enoch. And so in the text, in Enoch's vision, he talks about how he had authored, with the help of the angels, 360 some books, but we only have access to two. And it's my opinion that that the powers that be, they were trying to hide and to dissipate, to destroy this knowledge, and that they had succeeded in doing so, but that it was preserved, that the Most High had preserved it as part of the Ethiopic canon. And then when it was rediscovered and reintroduced to the Western Christian world, that's when not only was knowledge of the fallen angels and the giants and elaboration on the whole Genesis 6 brought to light, but also now with the work of my book and others that are reassessing and reevaluating, specifically the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries, which Enoch describes being given vision by the angel Uriel as to the motions of the sun and the moon above the circle of the earth, which is also referenced in Isaiah chapter 40, where he talks about it is he that sitteth on the circle of the earth, speaking about the Most High. And so both Isaiah and Enoch were given a vision of the circular flat plane of the earth below, with the heavens as firmament spread above it, and that when you can understand the premise of what they bring forth in Isaiah, and also in his scriptures, and also in the book of Enoch, then you can only make sense of it, and you can only understand his descriptions of the motions of the sun and the moon in application to the flat earth as model for the world, which is why this knowledge has been lost for 500 years. And myself being I guess one of the few that had revisited that text after coming to this revelation. I'm the only one that has written about it. I've looked before working on that book and publishing it. I'd looked for other books and other authors that were describing the motions of the sun, and there's not any available. And there are other authors which talk about some of the motions of the moon that Enoch describes, but the reason it has not been understood for at least since the world has embraced heliocentrism is because we believe that the Earth is moving, spinning daily on an axis and orbiting around the sun. And if this were the case, Enoch would have described the motions of the Earth and the moon, and not the sun and the moon. And so that's why nobody has been able to make sense of it. And so when you apply his description again for the motions of the sun and the moon to the flat circular plane as described in Isaiah, then one is able to grasp why he says that the sun and the moon move through these six gates of heaven and move from east to west and then back north to east, which is basically describing a circle, a revolutionary circuit, which is what the sun and the moon do above the face of the earth. Like if you're looking down on the earth as a clock's face, they spin in clockwise fashion, move above and around the polar north, around the Arctic regions, and they move up and down between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. And so Enoch speaks about and specifies the movement of the sun and the moon up and down between these six gates, which subdivide this particular breadth between the two tropics. And so when you can understand that and grasp the motion as far as these in the sun and the moon above the flat circular earth, the plane of the earth, then it became for me understandable. And I knew, because nobody else had written anything about it, that I had to write this book to not only explain my own personal journey to come into this revelation, but to present the material so that people can understand. And also it verifies the divinely inspired nature of not only the book of Enoch, but also the gospel, the canon, the Old and New Testament, because these things, the flat earth as model of world, they're encoded into both of these sets of scripture. And that has been for thousands of years. And now that we understand that the earth is indeed not globular, not spherical, and not rotating and orbiting around the sun, well, then again, these two texts are verified as being divinely inspired and had to have been written by God, because otherwise, how would we know? Because it would have been lost.
Yeah, yeah, and just being honest, my whole life, I could never take anything in the Bible literally, just because there's a contradiction there to the whole belief system.
Mm-hmm.
If we know the Earth is a spinning globe, then we know that the description in Genesis, the creation account in Genesis must be wrong.
Right.
You can't have both, and it's such a simple thing, like the way you put it. Enoch describes the motions of the sun and the moon, and so people, it's a contradiction to their belief system, and that's why they're not writing about it, because you can't have the sun and the moon have motion with the Earth stationary,
Right.
in their belief system. And it's really kind of funny. I mean, it's not funny, but ironic, because even people that claim to be evangelical, Bible believing Christians, they won't even look at this because of that deception. I mean, it really is a strong delusion, because if you've got people that are way smarter than you and lived hundreds of years ago, constructing what we believe to be true, if the Bible is in conflict with that, then we sort of have to either, you can't serve two masters. You just can't.
Right.
It's a really good way to put it, because there's just no way that a rational, intelligent person can take the Bible. I'm sorry, but there's no way you can take the Bible literally and be a globe earther. It
Yes.
just doesn't work. It really doesn't.
Right. Which is another reason why, when you try to understand the description in the book of Enoch of the sun moving between between the Tropic of Capricorn and to the Tropic of Cancer, it doesn't make sense, even if you apply it to looking directly down on the globe and at the North Pole, looking directly down on the North Pole. According to the globe model, the tropics should be on the very sides, and should not be visible, if you're looking directly down upon the North Pole. And so, but if you apply again these descriptions of these motions to the flat circular plane, and you understand how um, the the plane is set out as far as the azimuthal equidistant projection map, as is shown in the United Nations map, and you see how the equator and the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn are visible on, as far as these particular circles, and the circuits for the sun and the moon as they move back and forth between this particular region of the map, then you can understand it and you can grasp it and it makes sense. And so that's why I knew that the only way that you could understand that portion of the book of Enoch was applying it to the flat earth. And so that's why I wrote that particular book, to help people to understand it. And a lot of people have been greatly have been benefited from my work in that area. But another thing, as far as looking at the science and the complicated algorithms and the formulas and all of that, which are connected to the heliocentric worldview, in looking at the motions of the ratio and the motions of the Earth, I looked at, like, at the equator. It says that the circumference is 24,901 miles, and that when you divide this equatorial with the supposed rate of the spin, you get this number 1,037 miles an hour, 0.541 and so, and
Yeah,
then,
and that's because the 7 was rounded up. It would have just been 666
right,
to infinity.
right, to infinity. And so this 666 number kept presenting itself to me, like, for instance, when you um, do the 18.5 times 60 seconds and then times 60 minutes, you get that the Earth is supposedly spinning at this 66,600 miles per hour, which again is another 666 number. And then when you divide the supposed inclination from the 90 degrees, that if it were vertically straight up and down, the 23.4 degrees from the 90 degrees, you get 66.6 degrees, which, we know that the 666 number is connected to the Masons and the Luciferians. And so the fact that this number kept presenting itself to me just showed to me the sinister nature of the heliocentric worldview and who truly was behind that. And so I know that you did a video which has been which was really excellent, talking about the Nazis of NASA, and the connections to the infinite plane. And you were also talking about some of these numbers. And so can you comment on, because we know that the astronauts are Masons, and that the Masons are worshipers of Lucifer, and that Lucifer a long time ago said that he was going to exalt himself above the stars of God, and sit in the sides of the north, and upon God's throne in the sides of the north, and that he would be like the Most High. And it's my opinion that the heliocentric model, the way that it demotes the earth and makes the sun as the foremost, the preeminent body in this quote unquote solar system, that is part of his having succeeded in doing so, exalting himself. The whole demotion of the geocentric model, and it's part of the whole agenda to bring forth the Antichrist and the Antichrist system.
Well, here's the thing. I sort of always thought that, and they definitely do use 666 all over the place. It's all over modern culture. But in terms of the numbers, and another one, that I'll just mention real quick is the same curvature calculation, 8 inches per mile squared. If you multiply the distance in miles by 8 inches, it renders the drop in vertical curvature in inches. But if you multiply the square of the miles by 0.666, then it renders the result in feet. And so it really 666 is all over the place in terms of the globe model. But I've come to the conclusion that they didn't plan it that way at all. I actually believe that this is confirmation of the Great Deception, because it clearly warns us that, of that number.
Right.
And you find this number all over the place. The miles per hour around the sun in orbit is supposed to be 66600. The degrees tilt of axis off horizontal is 66.6. The curvature calculation I just mentioned. There's others. I mean, it's just everywhere. But no, I don't think they planned it at all. I think it's more them caught with their pants down, because the numbers that they use, they have to be. It's based on the idea, going way back to Eratosthenes, of his calculations of the distance to the sun. It has to be, if we're using feet and miles. I mean, if you use different types of units of measurement, you're not going to have those same anomalies. But using feet and miles and miles per hour, you get all those just repeating sixes and triple sixes. And so to me, it's more just verification of the prophecy than it is them leaving their signature all over the place. It's not intentional. It's just the way the numbers work.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Yeah. Hey, I want to give you a chance to talk about how it is that you did come to this revelation, and your awakening to all of this. I mean, what led you to begin your journey down this rabbit hole, and how long have you been looking into it?
About 7.5 months is when I put out my first video. It was on just so happened to be on May 1st, May Day. It's really just a coincidence, but I guess I'm a Freemason because I did that too.
Right.
I'm not a Freemason. Yeah, so about 7 months ago or whatever, I put out my first video, and sort of it was a week-long transformation process. I had actually seen the topic online and just disregarded it. I thought it was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. I thought, how could people be so moronic and gullible to believe this? And I just totally disregarded it. But maybe a year, 6 months after I had noticed it and disregarded it consciously, a friend of mine just happened to mention it just in passing. Really, we were having a sort of conversation about conspiracy theories, and he doesn't believe any of it. But so he was like, "Well, you're not a flat earther, are you?" And I was like, "Well, no. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." But it was actually that conversation that led me a few months after that to just watch a couple of actually Matt Boylan or Matt Powerland's videos. And I got to thinking about it, and a couple of things just really made sense with my observations over the course of my life. I mean, some things just clicked. And so that sort of led me to look into it more. And I probably spent 3 days in a row without sleeping looking at it, and then got
Right.
some sleep, and then spent 3 more days in a row looking at it, doing experiments, looking at different proofs, confirming this stuff for myself. And at the end of the day, there's no other conclusion than the world is definitely not a spinning globe whatsoever. And so what options do we have? Well, it's either a flat surface, or it's an inverted sphere, a concave sphere, which I don't believe. But then where do you go? Well, a Christian will go to the Bible. A scientific person might go all the way back to Principia. But once you come to this realization that there's actually something to this, if you have any sort of moral compass or integrity or self-respect, you have to sort of take this rabbit hole all the way through. And earlier you had asked, I've been on the whole 9/11 thing for years. I've been on this whole understanding that there's more to our government than we're told. Republican and Democrat, this whole Hegelian dialectic is a tactic. It's a divide and conquer tactic. And so that sort of framework definitely helped me come to this realization, because you have to concede that NASA is just totally full of it. And in order to do that, then you have to sort of break this. A lot of people have a very strong connection with NASA. Face it, it's American as apple pie. People love NASA. And so it's very difficult unless you have that framework of understanding that there's something wrong with 9/11. There's something wrong with the Boston bombing. This sort of thing's been going on since Vietnam, since World War II. The Freemasons get a lot of blame for things, but at the end of the day, most Freemasons don't even know what's going on in terms of any nefarious stuff that's going on. So
Right.
we're just talking about, really, to put it biblically, we're talking about spiritual wickedness. We're talking about principalities in high places, and
Right. All right. Hold on, brother.
Sure.
We'll be right back, everyone. All right. Welcome back, everybody, for second hour. Wanted to give you a little bit of chance to elaborate a little bit more on what you've been learning, because I know that you've been putting out a lot of information. And if you would talk about some of your recent series that you've released, what they're about, why it is that you decided to do these series, and also as far as how broad reaching and encompassing coming to this revelation has been for you, because it seems it's such a huge topic that it affects us on so many different levels that we didn't even really consider until we realized that heliocentrism was totally a lie, completely a lie, and having to reassess all the NASA stuff, all of that material, and everything as far as all the space agencies and what they're doing, all that funding, everything. So if you would, the series and stuff.
Yeah, and just real quick, it's totally changed my life, to get that one out of the way.
Yeah.
It's changed my perspective on everything. I mean, it's changed my perspective on even the definition of something like success. To me, success is helping someone to see the truth. Period. That's
Right.
it. And in terms of what I'm working on, I'm just really, my videos that I've been making over the last 7 months or so have just sort of been in response to the arguments that we typically get against this notion. And some of the big ones are gravity. That's probably the biggest one that you'll ever get, and this supposed motion of the Earth, right? So gravity is something that I personally have shown to be false. At least to myself, I totally understand how it's false and couldn't work in the heliocentric model. One thing that I've pointed to a few months ago was so at the equator, if you're supposedly spinning at over, 1,037.5 and some change, 666 in there,
Mm-hmm.
miles per hour. Okay, so that's pretty fast. That's actually way faster than the speed of sound. But it's not just an eastward velocity either. You're also dropping, this is the same curvature calculation, but you're also dropping over 700,000 feet per hour in such a situation. So that's a huge amount of force, outward thrust generated at the equator, or centrifugal force. It would just be tremendous. At the North Pole, the Earth is only spinning about half the speed as the hour hand on a clock. And you're also not having that falling away due to the zipping around a curve at 1,000 miles an hour. So if gravity is actually, this equal force on all points of a sphere, then you should weigh thousands of times more at the North Pole. Now, physicists will argue, well, people weigh slightly more at the North Pole, but that is actually in line with the barometric pressure. If you take barometric pressure readings starting in the north and head south to the equator, the barometric pressure slowly drops when you get to the equator, and when you continue south beyond the equator, it continues to drop. So that right there is a big contradiction. And if it was a sphere, you would sort of expect to see bilateral symmetry on the poles. So that's one thing. But gravity itself is just the idea that what goes up must come down. That's the observation that led to all these calculations and how could it theoretically work if the Earth was a spinning globe. But people will take this notion that, if I say and I can prove that gravity doesn't exist, they say, well, go jump off a building and see if it exists. But they're missing the point. What I'm saying is that gravity doesn't exist in the sense that most of us scientifically understand it as the mass of the Earth warping space and time and causing sort of a equal and opposite reaction, or a surface tension of nothing, a vacuum pushing down back into the face of the Earth and pushing you down and everything down towards the Earth. But again, if it's not a spinning globe, then what goes up still comes down. But for someone to say what goes up must come down, therefore we live on a spinning globe, is just ridiculous.
Right.
And so, sort of what I've been focusing on is just really just hammering these arguments into what they are, which is ridiculous. It's just nonsense. It's just stuff that we've been taught is true, when all it is just theoretical possibility. That's all it is. So
I got a couple comments, and as far as gravity, because I thought about this too, and how they're saying that these two bodies, like for instance the sun and then the planets and this solar system, that they are attracting each other. With Mercury being as small as it is, and supposedly being the closest planet to the sun, how is it that it's not sucked into the sun and completely destroyed outright, with it being as small as it is? How is it even escaping if the sun has this grand velocity to hold all of these planets, even these large outer gaseous planets in orbital rotation around it? How does it make any sense that Mercury exists and is still in orbit around it? That doesn't make any kind of sense to me. And then there's considerations like they say that gravity is the reasons the oceans are held into place on a sphere, and even with our spinning at 1,037 miles an hour, at the equator or whatever, how is it possible that the that when you start a fire, smoke can escape and it can rise, or that a butterfly can fly and lift itself in that altitude and fly into the wind, or a piece of paper can be lifted up off, blown by the wind and lifted up into the sky, or even like a feather or something like that. And yet supposedly gravity can distinguish as to it needs to hold the oceans in place, or to hold people that are living in these southern latitudes, like in continents like Australia, that are supposedly standing upside down, that it can keep all of them in place, while at the same time allow all these other things to take place, as far as like butterflies and dragonflies flying, or the smoke rising into the air. It can allow things like that to escape, but yet still hold all these oceans and people in place, buildings in place upside down. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, and it actually it makes perfect sense in the flat Earth model because it's just density and buoyancy.
Exactly. Right,
That's
right,
all it is. If you hold a beach ball underwater, it's going to race to the surface and find its balance point. It's going to find, naturally just balance out based on density and temperature. That's it. If you fill up a balloon full of helium, it'll fly up in the air. Technically, a kite is a geostationary satellite. Also,
right.
when a rocket takes off, I've seen lots of rocket launches. I actually went down to Cape Canaveral for one when I lived in Florida many years ago, but you can see them from Orlando, all the time. But a rocket going straight up into the air is also sort of geostationary, isn't it? And when you try to demonstrate how that actually works and what is causing that rocket to go straight up and not, apparently head west as it gains in altitude because of that spin, it really doesn't make sense in the heliocentric model, but density and buoyancy make perfect sense on the flat Earth model, and you don't have to account for all the oceans being wrapped around a curve, which you can't demonstrate that anywhere.
Right.
But you're right. A butterfly can beat gravity. A helium balloon can beat gravity. A freaking kite can beat gravity, but it holds all the oceans in place while they're spinning over 1,000 miles an hour at perpendicular to the axis of the Earth. It just doesn't add up. And so there's those sort of arguments that a rational person would have against the globe are all squashed when we're about 5 or 6 years old,
Hmm.
because a lot of children actually, when you sort of break this to them and say, hey, guess what, bud, you live on a spinning globe, children don't accept it, and it takes conditioning and years of it to get a child to really accept this. And so any arguments or rational thinking or experiments that we might have done to figure this out, it's irrelevant, because apparently we already have all the answers, and so that's a big problem that we're faced with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we, again, we give them the benefit of the doubt, and then things like learning about the how NASA with Apollo 11, how they were perpetuating the lie. I believe you've probably seen the video, where they were using the window of the lunar module um, to make the public believe that they were far into space, and that they were close to the moon, and they were looking down upon this small globe of the Earth, and then all of a sudden you see that they're doing all these tricks with the window, and that they're inside of the lunar module, and that they're actually in low Earth orbit.
Or high altitude flight. It's really
Yeah,
it's
right,
hard
right,
to
yeah,
it's hard to distinguish between low Earth orbit and high altitude
yeah,
flight,
true.
especially when there's trick photography involved.
Right. And then so, things like that. And then even NASA coming out with that there's this these Van Allen radiation belts, which are an impenetrable barrier. And that, how was it that they successfully navigated and broke beyond during all these supposed Apollo lunar missions? And how is it that they were able to carry this rover and to land this lunar module with this one particular rocket engine? I mean, all these things, and then looking into the angle as far as the the light source and the angle of the shadows, two different angles, and so all of that also brings into question. And then there's things like bubbles from these lunar walks, spacewalks. Kathy just recently sent me something about one of these spacewalks, these live ISS spacewalks. It had to have been, it was cut short because the astronaut's helmet started filling with water. You know, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
don't know if you heard of that.
yeah, I heard the story. I hadn't researched it, but yeah, it seems like they're faking a lot of the spacewalk. Well, the spacewalks appear to be faked in an underwater tank. The stuff from NASA, going to the moon and coming back, even more recently, just last year, out of the University of Sydney, with Castro, an undergraduate astrophysicist named Cleo Loy found and actually recorded live. Animate or not a live animation, but a live rendering of these theoretical plasma tubes that have only been theoretical up until last year. Now, these plasma tubes exist in the lower magnetosphere, and they've been imaged by legitimate astrophysicists just last year. Okay, now I did a little bit of research into plasma, and it is sort of a hard thing to wrap your brain around, but essentially it's just ionized gases. And if you look at what potentially these plasma tubes are in our lower so-called magnetosphere, maybe properly called the magnetoplane, maybe,
Right.
but what these plasma tubes could be is they could be magnetic fusion plasma, which goes up to 10 to the 8th Kelvin. That's over, I think it's like 180 million degrees Fahrenheit, and yet somehow the Apollo astronauts were able to go through them and back and not even notice it.
Right. Right.
The other thing too is if you have a metallic craft without any radiation shielding, that plasma is going to basically electrify everything metal. Um, so there's major problems, and it seems like maybe they're able to put some sort of craft into a high altitude flight, or even just for all we know, that picture of the Earth from space from Apollo that could have been taken through the window. That could have been a high weather balloon, a high
Right.
altitude balloon. Um, for us to take what NASA tells us and just assume that it's true because their government is, that's just the opposite of critical thinking, and the opposite of science. But scientists, unfortunately, they go to school for a long time learning all this stuff. You mentioned someone had asked about orbits and why isn't Mercury, sucked into the sun. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Of course, the numbers work in theory. They've made sure of that. The numbers are going to work. So if you're good enough at math to spend 10 years figuring out how to do the math, yeah, the math will work. But
Mhm.
you can never demonstrate that.
Right.
You can't measure it in real terms. It's all just done by observations here on the ground, and it's just it's a big fat lie with NASA. I mean, they're definitely lying, and I'm not surprised at all that they cut short the spacewalk. And yeah, I put in, you can see lots of air bubbles in space on the International Space Station,
Hmm.
scuba tanks, snorkels, and yeah, they do their training in a tank, and it seems like they're filming it in a tank too.
Yeah, I agree. There's too many discrepancies and verification of that. You would in the supposed vacuum of space, there's not going to be air bubbles like as if it's rising up in a watery medium. I mean, those kind of things. And then as far as people ask me as far as these satellites, because supposedly there's 20,000 satellites up there, but yet we never and the satellite images of the Earth from space and how this is verification that we live on a globe. And yet, all these satellites, nobody knows where all of them are and how there's never one that runs into another one or that ever hits the International Space Station. None of them have ever broke down. And the fact that they're all flying in the thermosphere or higher when they're built of components that are said to that would disintegrate or melt if you actually look and do some research into the temperatures that they say that are located in the thermosphere, that these things just can't exist. I mean, there's no possibility according to even what they are telling us. And so, if people would just do a little bit of research on that kind of stuff, it helps to verify why we shouldn't trust NASA or science and the things that they are trying to perpetuate as fact.
Yeah, it's funny. We talk about satellites because we've got cell phones and we've got GPS.
Right.
So there must be satellites up there. But if you actually look into it, um, Doppler radar is a ground-based system. That's not pictures from space. Um, Cell phone towers, you have to have cell phone towers around to get GPS and cell phone reception. And so the technology was actually developed by Nikola Tesla back in the 40s to support things even like the internet and long distance wireless transmissions and GPS. I mean, the military's been using radio triangulation for decades and decades. And so for people to say that we have GPS, therefore there's satellites up there, it's a leap in faith. And when you actually figure out that satellites, first of all, aren't necessary with Tesla-based ground-based technologies, but they're not only they're not necessary, but they couldn't even work.
Right.
A geostationary satellite would have to be over 20,000 miles away. Some of them are supposedly 400 miles away, but it's impossible. People say they see the International Space Station with a telescope. That's supposed to be almost 400 miles away. You shouldn't be able to see that. So that tells
Right.
me it's actually closer. It's probably something like high altitude flight, and they're
Right.
just putting it across the sky, basically where it should be in order to fool people. That's what I believe. But yeah, when you really get down to it and start looking at this sort of thing, satellites aren't necessary. They wouldn't work. And find a picture of one. You can't. That you'll only find artist renderings. You'll see NASA launching them off into what is ostensibly an underwater pool. But you'll never find, I've looked and looked, and I've never found an actual image of any satellites, even from the supposed Japanese footage that was released last year, that shows the entire Earth going through many, many day and night cycles. You can't see any stars, and you can't see any of these satellites. They're not up there, even if that was a true shot, which it wasn't. So
Right.
yeah, it's just beyond ridiculous. First of all, because they could achieve, if they needed satellites to bounce long range communications, they could do it with geostationary weather balloons. Such a thing is much easier to achieve, and it would be much closer, and so it would be conducive to radio frequency waves. Radio frequency waves don't propagate for 10,000 miles or 360 million miles like they did in the 1970s when the Pioneer 10 was sent to Jupiter. Pioneer 10 supposedly went 90 million miles to the asteroid belt, then 90 million miles through the asteroid belt, and then another 185 million miles to Jupiter minimum, and was somehow able to beam back radio frequency waves. Um, so there's issues with, if NASA was actually doing all this stuff, if NASA was actually coming up with solutions for radio frequency waves to propagate for 300 million miles, or if they were coming up with solutions even for simple things like gaskets and valves that don't work in a vacuum environment, or materials that don't work when you put them to, the flux of temperature from extreme heat in the daytime to extreme cold in the nighttime up there in the thermosphere. There's no materials known to man that can withstand that sort of
Right.
temperature flux. And so the fact that we as taxpayers are essentially supporting NASA, or subsidizing NASA, or really we're basically investors in NASA, we should be benefiting from their exploration and all of these wonderful inventions that they're not coming up with to solve problems in space. And so, it's a huge disservice to us, because not only are they taking our money to fake space and trick us into not believing in the Bible, for one thing, but they're taking our money and not giving us any return on our investments, except for Tang and their sweaty jock straps. Right?
Right. Right. Well, let me ask you this. For those that are just now coming to begin to investigate this and that want to approach either loved ones or family members, or even just spark a conversation with somebody, a friend or acquaintance, how would you suggest that they approach people? What kind of things do you think that they should look into, investigate first, so that they can, prepare themselves? Because anybody, in my opinion, that begins to start talking about this really should know what they're talking about, because there are going to be a lot of questions. And so how would you tell people to approach others if they are and have the willingness to talk about these kind of things with them.
Don't do it. No, I'm kidding. It's tricky because not everyone is ready to receive this message.
Right.
Period.
Yeah.
You can prove this 50 different ways. You really can. There's good evidence to support this position, or I wouldn't be talking about it. I wouldn't have made the first video. But you're right. You sort of have to become an expert before you even open that can of worms, because everybody's going to have different questions, and more or less the same arguments are used. There really are. There's only a few tricky ones. For example, the Southern Star is supposedly making a circuit around the South Pole Star, which you can't find any photographs of that either, of the South Pole Star. But at the end of the day, if you care about someone and you want them to understand this, first of all, be careful. Because I know somebody that took this information to her pastor and was ultimately institutionalized. So,
Goodness.
first of all, make sure you know what you're talking about, but second of all, be careful, and third of all, be prepared to answer a lot of questions that you don't have answers for. And instead of making something up, it's better to say, sometimes I don't know. Maybe since you're the expert on that topic, you can help figure it out. But if you can find certain things that helped you to verify it, for me, it was the identical duration of eastbound versus westbound flights. The same sort of rule applies to artillery fire.
Yeah.
If you put artillery at an angle, whatever angle, if you face it north, south, east, or west, it doesn't matter, depending on atmospheric conditions, but it's basically going to go the same distance. A flight from LA to New York is going to take basically the same amount of time as the return flight. And that sort of thing just isn't possible on a globe that's spinning at the given rate. So that one right there is a good one. The other one, I call the Geocentrism effect, which basically, if you look at the heliocentric model on a 2D map, you've got the sun in the middle. You've got the winter Earth on the left, tilted in towards the sun at the top, and then you've got the summer sun on the right, tilted away from the sun towards the top. If you're standing at the equator and looking above your head in the winter, you're looking way off up into the left into the infinite void of space, right? But then in the summer, you're on the other side of the sun, looking way down into the right into the infinite void of space if you're looking up above your head. And yet we see many of the same constellations from winter to summer.
Yeah.
So that actually totally disproves heliocentrism. And so those are two, just to prove the lack of curvature, prove the lack of motion, prove that there's no way that we could observe buildings from over 50 miles away if the Earth was a globe. You can do all that, and the person will still think you're stupid and crazy because it doesn't jive with their belief system. And so the best thing to do is maybe, just raise the topic, let them sort of research it on their own, help them along their way. And at the end of the day, if you feel like you're going to get locked up, just run.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that you really have to be careful in who you approach and your willingness to talk to others. And there's nothing wrong with honoring people for where they are, and if they want to hold on to the heliocentric worldview, even though there's no reason factually to do so, let them be in their delusion for a while. All right, we'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody, for final segment. I want to give you a chance to give out your website and your contact information again, and if you would mention the last 3 or 4 series that you've released, and you said that you're also going to be releasing a video tomorrow, and can you tell us what that's about?
Yeah, it'll probably be this weekend or Monday, somewhere in the next couple days. It's sort of a working title. Flat Earth, if not, you're a dumbass moron. And it's not directed at anybody except for the people that just continue to troll and continue to basically spout out ignorance. In terms of what I've recently come out with, I'm limited to 15-minute video segments because of a copyright strike. Some bull. But the most recent one was What Goes Up Must Come Down. Just looking at, again, gravity. That's sort of a big one because it's an easy one to debunk. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
All maps
is not a valid menu option.
Oops. All maps are liars was this is an important one because we really don't have any accurate maps. Even the little globe isn't accurate. The Mercator projection isn't accurate, nor is I don't believe the azimuthal equidistant projection accurate, because map making, takes a lot of assumptions into account based on astronomical observations. The latitude and longitude lines are just imaginary lines, so there aren't actually lines out there in the sea. But that's how they map out things relatively on depending on the matrix of the map. It's all based on latitude and longitude lines. And so, with that in mind, like the Mercator projection and even the Peters projection is it's a cylindrical conformal map. And so what that means is it's sort of correct near the equator, but then it gets less and less correct towards the poles, up to the point to where the poles are supposedly a single point stretched out to infinity. So that's how incorrect the tops and bottoms of the Mercator projection are. On the other hand, when you look at the typical flat Earth map, which is like the Gleason's or the azimuthal equidistant, there's problems with that too. And sort of the same sort of distortion applies. You've got the map being sort of correct towards the very center of it, but it gets less and less correct as you get towards that outermost ring, to where distances are essentially stretched out along to infinity. So, basically, we don't have any accurate maps. And one of the things that I'm trying to do, and I'm no cartographer by any means, but I'm just trying to maybe put out some suggestions in terms of, what can we look at differently, or what can we possibly change in the matrix of the map. So maybe not, let's not go by all these same assumptions. Like, for example, and I'm not saying this is the case, but if you assume that the 90-degree north latitude isn't a single point, but is instead like a ring, like the inside of a donut, like a torus, then it could totally change the whole matrix of the map. And so, will we ever have an accurate map of the world? I think so, maybe at one point, but we certainly don't. And there's good evidence to support this. I mean, you go ask any cartographer, and they'll tell you there's problems with all the maps, even the globe, and I'll tell you there's problems with even the flat Earth map. We still have to have a model. We still have to be able to sort of demonstrate what we're talking about. But for us to have a perfect map, when the globe doesn't have to have a perfect map, is ridiculous. Why should we be held to a higher standard than all of science for the past 500 years, right?
Mm-hmm, right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I know that there are problems because when people break down, even like according to the maps that we have, the distances as far as certain flights or certain sea flight, as far as the naval ship maritime distances, that there are often discrepancies, and people are talking about these kind of things when they bring into question, and talk about their testimony of having come to knowledge that the Earth that we're living on is not a spherical, globular, round ball-like planet. And so there's a lot of things that, as far as this revelation, we're having to reconsider so many things, and there's so much that we don't know. We have to, look again at things, even like the whole thing, with Planet X and Nibiru, and how so many people looking at the Sumerian belief systems, the return of this planet, and how it supposedly, was this planet of the crossing, having this 3,600 mile or 3,600 year orbital rotation around the center of the solar system. All of that too. I mean, what do we really know, and can we trust? And as far as the ancient cosmologies and the beliefs, the Sumerian mythologies, we're having to reconsider everything. Even like with the, some believe in an infinite plane, some believe in enclosed system, some believe that there's no dome at all, and so these are also things that we're having to reassess and redetermine, and it's going to take dialogue and fellowship, doing roundtables like we're going to be doing tomorrow, and even like we're doing tonight and have done, to come down to the nitty gritty of some of these answers, and because we just really don't know. And like as far as the last 500 years, everybody has embraced the whole plausibility that we live on one of these 9 planets of this solar system, and that there's all these other Earths out there, and that those that are at the distance extent to be in the Goldilocks zone, that they also perpetuate life, and that life evolved there, and that there's all this life also scattered through the universe. And so there's so much that what are some of the things that you have are still considering, thinking about, delving upon, pondering, as far as embracing this as knowledge?
Yeah, and I was really way into all that deception in terms of Nibiru and the whole ancient alien theory and
Right.
The Sumerian text, talking about the Anunnaki and all that. I believe, um, to me, it's just so liberating because I was pretty afraid of Nibiru, and it's so funny.
Right.
It's so funny because you'll have people constructing all of these, basically theories or lies around Nibiru. Like, for example, one of the things that I thought was pretty good evidence for Nibiru, or circumstantial evidence for Nibiru, was the fact that the big, I believe it's Lucifer, whatever the telescope that the Catholic Church
Yes.
and the Jesuits have in the far
Hmm.
southern hemisphere, they never pointed down below the solar plane, or the orbital plane. The Earth and all the planets except one, I believe, supposedly orbit on the same plane around the sun, and for some reason, the big astronomical telescopes are never pointed down beneath that plane. And the whole thing was, it's because Nibiru's down there and they'd see it for sure, and that's why they're not showing it to us. But in fact, the reason that you can't do that is because the Earth isn't a globe and there is no space beneath us.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So, to me, it's just very liberating. I mean, I sleep a whole lot better at night because this is the sort of things I worry about, right? I
Hmm.
worry about a nuclear bomb going off in Charleston Harbor, which there was supposedly a threat of that. But when you come to the realization that nuclear bombs probably don't even exist, that may have been a big hoax, then that's very liberating. The same thing goes with Nibiru. Hell, I would think of situations where our entire solar system could slam into a huge black hole one day. But when you realize that black holes aren't even theoretically possible, and even, CERN searching for dark matter, which is allegedly what keeps planets into their curved linear orbit, is this dark matter, sort of a chain, or the fabric of space-time. None of this stuff theoretically even needs to exist. It's just theoretical folly. And so when you really understand this to be true, it's just I've experienced health benefits. I sleep better. So it's definitely not one of those things to where, a lot of these conspiracy theories are like fear porn. If you go on the dark net for too long, you're going to end up a paranoid wreck.
Hmm.
And all of that sort of mindset, all of that framework is hinging on, the heliocentric model. It really does. Nibiru, black holes, Einstein-Rosen bridges, all of this weird stuff. And then even, as far as I can tell, the Anunnaki. I'm not sure what's up with that. That's a very bizarre story from ancient Sumerian lore. But, at the end of the day, it's just such a very balanced and peaceful place that we actually live on. It's not just some little cosmic accident in the Goldilocks zone. It's more than that. There's more to it than that. And to me, I always looked at history as, stupid people. They didn't even know they lived on a spinning ball, but in fact, they had a better understanding of the natural world than we do in all of our technical, so-called intelligence.
Yes, yes. Yeah, absolutely. And then, the whole thing as far as these wandering stars, planets orbiting around the sun, when you realize that our sun is even smaller than that of the earth, and if it's moving in circuit above us, and the book of Enoch says it's the same size and dimension as that of the moon, and according to the Genesis creation account, the earth was created first, the firmament fitted to it, and then the sun and the moon and the celestial, the luminaries placed into the firmament, which is fitted to the earth. Then, you realize that the proportions that we've been given are completely wrong and fallacious, and that if there are other planets out there and they are orbiting around the sun, well, they're nothing like what we've been told and what has been perpetuated as far as the heliocentric worldview. But I do want to get you to elaborate really quick on what you were talking about as far as nuclear weapons for those that may not have heard or have looked into this. Can you
Sure.
elaborate?
Yeah, and I thought this was pretty silly too, because we all know the stories about Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
Mm-hmm.
We've all seen the videos, and back in the day when Nagasaki and Hiroshima were bombed, they were measuring the atomic bombs in megatons, and it was maybe 1 or 2 megaton bombs that they allegedly dropped. Now, what that means is megaton is just a way to describe the force of the blast, and it means 1,000 tons of dynamite. And so the blasts that we can see being tested that are supposedly these big mushroom clouds, and they look very realistic. So it was obviously an explosion that went off in these military, footage videos. But that could have been 1,000 tons of dynamite, and the military certainly has access to that sort of explosive power. When you look at the documentary footage, everyone's seen the one with all the trees being knocked over like sticks, and then that house being torn to shreds, but the camera's okay. That looks very much like a scale model. In fact, if you actually go back and look at some of this stuff that's allegedly nuclear test footage, a lot of it is scale models. Some of it's real big explosions, could have been dynamite, and some of it's scale models. Now, in terms of Nagasaki and Nagasaki and Hiroshima, whatever happened to them was awful. There was certainly something that happened awful to those cities, but if you compare the footage of, say, Berlin that was definitely carpet bombed, fire bombed, Nagasaki and Hiroshima look very similar right after the fact. Furthermore, those are bustling cities today with lots and lots of people living on them. There's no worries with the radioactive decay and pollution and stuff that you would have if we actually nuked them. But personally, look at the atomic model anyway. Nobody's ever imaged an atom. It's all just theoretical. And the numbers work, and that's how we get atomic weight and stuff. But nobody's ever imaged one, and they look awfully like a little solar system, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Little atoms with their electrons orbiting around the center. And so it's almost like they've filled us up, even, theoretically, they've filled us up with little suns and solar systems. And when you actually do the research, when they allegedly lit off the first atomic bomb, they didn't know whether it was going to cause a chain reaction that destroyed the entire world. And, that's just very risky. With propaganda, though, if they could convince everyone that they had this technology and achieve the same ends as if they did, then technically it's irrelevant whether or not they actually have the technology, as long as everyone believes that they do. And so, if you just sort of apply that to, it's really the Occam's razor. I mean, it's what the simplest explanation is often going to be the truth. And so, when you have all these complex things going on and bizarre things going on with atomic bombs, and nobody's ever, we haven't had any in modern history. The only 2 that have been lit off on civilian populations were the 2 in World War II. And just frankly, the evidence isn't there. You don't have the glassification that would necessarily occur. I mean, there's just all sorts of inconsistencies. And so to me, I'm fairly well convinced, and I have researched this enough to, at least for my own personal certainty, that atomic bombs probably don't exist. I'm 99% sure. And so that, and you can call me a kook and stupid, but if you actually go and research that, it's another one of these things that we assume is true because we've been taught it to be true our whole lives. I remember being taught all about satellites when I was just a little kid, so it is hard to let go. But atomic bombs is, that's a very liberating thing to let go of. If they actually don't have the ability to do this, then this whole, even the games Fallout 3 and 4 and 5 or whatever couldn't possibly happen because, they don't have the ability to blow up the world. They just don't. And I think it's probably, God created that as sort of a caveat into our existence anyway, that, we can do damage to ourselves, and yeah, we can blow up the mountain ranges, but we're not going to do much damage to this huge, massive Earth, I don't think.
Uh-huh. Question from the chat room.
Sure.
What do you think about wormwood? And do you think it has any connections to with the, as far as the Planet X or the Sumerian Nibiru or whatever?
Yeah, I've heard those connected before, and
Right.
that's sort of what I was under the impression of, that that's what the Bible was talking about. And I honestly, I haven't gone back and revisited that. That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm pretty darn sure that there are definitely. Well, I hate to use the word celestial bodies because I'm not even 100% sure that some of the celestial bodies are physical objects.
Right.
They,
Right.
they they may be, but assuming that there is some rogue, what is it, like brown dwarf star, or call it wormwood, or call it Nibiru, it may just be a spectacular light show. I mean, we have eclipses and comets. We have lots of things going on up there in the firmament, or in the I call it sometimes the astral plane, that maybe we're not meant to understand because we can't go up that high. If you believe NASA, even to this day, they can't go up much higher than 350 miles because of the radiation when you get up there. So I don't believe NASA about anything, but I'll just go ahead on the record and say, I don't think that we have any issues on the horizon with Nibiru. I really don't, and whatever wormwood may have been in the Bible, that's probably something that needs to be researched, because I just really don't think it's Nibiru anymore. I used to. That's what I thought. I was with basically everyone else on that, but I just don't. I don't see it. I don't. It could be something that takes us by surprise, but who knows?
Yeah, I'm in agreement as far as, these planetary objects and bodies, that they're certainly not what we had thought they were, and they're most certainly not terraform like the Earth, the huge massive living space that we see as far as the Earth. And then there's these videos of people that have been taking these really close up telescopic images that look like planets, or like these sacred geometric sound frequencies or patterns, and even some of these light stars. They've taken these close up images, and they don't even they look like these geometric patterns, like this some kind of sacred pattern, like a sound frequency pattern. And so, yeah, they're not, certainly not suns, and even our sun is not what we were told, that having 99.86% of the mass of the so-called solar system. And so, yeah, we're having to reassess so much. But I want to give you a chance to discuss anything that you feel is of importance, and also as far as final commentary to the listening audience, and also give out your website contact info one more time.
Yeah. So this whole thing is really important to me. All of it, every last bit of it, even the discussion with people that don't believe it. That's probably one of the more important things. I would just tell anybody that wants to really look at good evidence, and you're not going to get taken off into left field, just check out my YouTube channel. It's the Morgile, TheMorgile, on YouTube. That's pretty much all I'm doing at this point. I'll probably have other things in the future, but just check out some of my stuff. If you have questions, I try to respond. It might take me a while, and I might never get to it, honestly, the way things are going anymore. But
Right.
I will do my best. And if I see questions coming up a lot, I'll try to make videos to sort of respond to them en masse, instead of having to type everything out manually, because I'm only one person, and when I first started getting into this, one of the most exciting things to me about it was debating people about it, because I knew I was right and I knew I could prove it. But it's gotten to the point to where, I could do one or the other. I can respond to comments all day long and not do anything else, or, I can do other things and not really get to my comments. And I had to ultimately make that sacrifice, decision, which was tough, because I really enjoy doing that. But you get a lot of negativity, you really do, and so it's just sort of hard to keep cranking through comments with 10 people in a row calling you a stupid moron, and then 2 people in a row saying, hey, that was great, that was well done and stuff. So
Mhm.
I guess you got to take the good with the bad. And I guess final thoughts would be, I'm definitely curious more about looking into things like the Book of Enoch, which I had studied a bit a couple years ago. Wormwood, that's another good idea. I mean, you get so many good ideas and suggestions from people, and my response to that is, maybe you would be the one to look at Wormwood and come up with alternate theories on it, because
Right.
I'm no expert on it. I know a little bit about it. I know it was mentioned, in biblical text, and it was sort of described the same way in the ancient Sumerian text, but there's something else to it. And sure, we could have some spectacular and even possibly devastating celestial activity occur that we didn't see coming, but it's not coming up from below the south of the ecliptic or south of the orbital plane. That's all I'm saying.
Hmm. Yeah, and there's another passage in Revelation where it talks about the stars being cast down to the earth in our regular heliocentric model of what's going on out there in the universe. That would be absolutely devastating. But that how does that apply? Because stars are most certainly not suns. If you are considering the scripture being played out in that way. But when you think about them as being possibly, celestial entities or luminaries, and how stars are also equated with being angelic beings, and much like Lucifer and the rebel angels that were cast out of the heavens, cast down to the earth, that, they would be more applicable in that way. And so there's a lot of things that we're having to make sense of and investigate, and we're learning together, but yeah, we appreciate you taking the time to join us, man. Also, can you let people know about this show tomorrow?
Sure. Yeah. And you're going to be on with us tomorrow on the Globebuster show. We do Sundays at 3 Eastern and Wednesdays at 8 Eastern. We always have lots of, different really awesome guests. It's always flat Earth talk. And then I do Sundays with Laurie Ferrari and Lawrence Wright on This Week in Flat Earth on the Flat Earth Conspiracy Channel. So lots of good stuff coming up. You guys definitely check out the YouTube page. Come and hang out with us on the shows, and just hopefully you can help someone that to actually look at this and get it. That's my goal, and hopefully, if I can just maybe pass this on to one or two other people, they'll pass it on to one or two other people, and then eventually you have a critical mass where people are standing at NASA's door saying, Houston, we've got a big problem here.
Right, right. And as far as all of us, none of us are experts on this in any regard. We're, for many of us, we're only 7-8 months into it in investigating, rediscovering what has been lost knowledge. But I do find, like, looking into some of the ancient accounts, that the ancients had a greater understanding of what was going on than supposed our technologically advanced world, and all of the heliocentric scientists, these PhD degrees and their professional opinions. All right, we got 1 minute, brother. So one final comment from you.
Yeah, I would say, in terms of the stars falling from the sky, that's really only possible in the flat Earth model. Wouldn't work on a globe. And if you look at even the ancient texts of like fire and brimstone, which is like balls of fire coming within ice, so you've got fire within ice hitting the ground. To me, that makes a lot of sense in the flat Earth model, especially if you think that perhaps before the days of the Great Flood, we may have been covered by a sheet of ice above where the sort of sun is. Who knows? But so many different things align with this, especially biblically, scientifically, rationally, logically. I mean, it's the truth, and so it works in everything that you can possibly apply it to. It definitely works better than the old way.
Hey, man, we appreciate you, brother. I'll be in touch soon, and we'll catch you tomorrow. Everyone awesome. Catch us tomorrow. ISS Globebusters with Morgile and Jaron and Bob. God bless all.
Peace.
Right. Peace.